and welcome to another episode of Guilty Until Proven Innocent. Tonight, we will be examining the historical case of Kyle Unger and his never-ending battle for justice of his wrongful conviction. June 22nd, 1990, in a small town located inside of Manitoba called Rose Isle. There was a rock music festival held at a ski resort in which 19-year-old Kyle Unger and his classmate 16-year-old Bridget Grenier attended separately with unrelated groups of friends. Bridget was seen dancing and kissing 17-year-old Timothy Houlihan, whom the two teens did not know. The following day, Bridget's brutally beaten and mutilated body was found lying in a heavily wooded area of the concert grounds. She had been bitten, struck in the head several times, strangled, and had long, sharp sticks forced up her vagina and anus. In such a small community, a brutal murder of a young girl led to a public outcry and an overwhelming pressure on the police to solve the crime. Timothy and Bridget left the festival together and entered a nearby secluded wooded area of the resort. Houlihan was not seen again until 4 a.m. with scratches on his face and mud on his clothes. He claimed that his injuries were the result of a surprise beating by an unknown male, and afterwards he had passed out. Kyle, on the other hand, was out of his friend's sight for as little as 20 minutes, but other witnesses claimed not to have seen Kyle between 2:30 and 4 o'clock a.m. There was no disagreement, however, that when Unger returned to the group, he did not have any dirt on his clothing or scratches or bruises on his face. There were rumors, though, that the police found a school photograph in Unger's gun case with a note from the victim consisting of a harsh joke. It was not determined whether this was used in court or if it was even true. Unger and Houlihan were both interviewed by the RCMP in the days following the murder, noting the visible markings on Houlihan's face and hands just 2 days after Bridget's body was discovered. Houlihan gave his first of 2 statements. He admitted to having consensual sex with Bridget, but claimed that he was attacked by an unidentified male who left him unconscious. After being asked, Houlihan stated that he had never seen Unger, but proceeded to give police a description of his attacker that led RCMP to Unger. In Houlihan's second statement to the police, he directly implicated Unger in Bridget's murder, giving police a detailed description of the murder consistent with forensic and medical evidence. Houlihan also claimed that under extreme duress and out of fear of his own safety, he assisted Unger in moving the body. Tunnel vision is when police focus in on one suspect and try to build a case around the potential, but not yet proven, guilt of that suspect. In this case, police came to their own conclusions that Unger was responsible for the murder. The police became willfully blind, abandoning all other leads and creating a theory that Unger and Houlihan conspired to commit a crime, even though they did not know each other. They focused exclusively on Unger, crafting a case that would support the evidence. The forensic evidence against Houlihan was strong. Blood found on his running shoes consistent with Bridget's, and a hair found on the victim's pants was consistent with having originated from Houlihan's pubic hair. As for the evidence against Unger,
the only physical evidence against Kyle Unger was a hair found on the victim's sweatshirt that Dangerfield argued could be Unger's. At the time, there was no definitive way to prove that.
a single hair found on the victim's sweater, consistent with a sample from the scalp hair he willingly provided the police. These samples were taken prior to DNA technology, and the analysis was based on hair microscopy, which is now regarded as having limited use in investigations.
There have been more than 235 people exonerated by DNA in this country. And as we first reported in March, now a stunning pattern has emerged. More than 3/4 of them were sent to prison, at least in part, because an eyewitness pointed a finger. An eyewitness who we now know was wrong.
The most leading cause of wrongful convictions is eyewitness misidentification. sometimes even co-defendant testimony, possibly by the person who actually committed the crime. Houlihan pointed the finger at Unger, claiming Unger was responsible for the murder after Houlihan had sexually assaulted Bridget.
It's a cliche of courtroom dramas. That moment when the eyewitness is asked, "Do you see the person who committed the crime here in this courtroom before you?" Well, it happens in real courtrooms all the time. And to jurors, that point of the finger by a confident witness is about as damning as evidence can get.
James Lockyer, the lawyer who represented Unger in his wrongful conviction appeal, believes that Houlihan was the sole culprit in the murder, and he blamed Unger in an attempt to alleviate the pressure on himself and to clear his own name completely. The reliability of incarcerated criminals offering information for deals or rewards is highly scrutinized. In this case, Jeffrey Cohen, a convicted felon, swore that while sharing a cell during pre-trial custody, Unger stated, "I killed her and got away with it." However, years later it was discovered that Unger could have never said this to Cohen during the time claimed. Cohen may have sought a deal or was pressured into helping the police, but whatever the reason, he perjured his testimony on the stand and admitted to doing so. The Crown, however, still tried to rehabilitate their jailhouse informant by suggesting that the confession occurred at a different time.
Manitoba's star Crown prosecutor, George Dangerfield, is a name to remember. He is responsible for the most wrongful murder convictions in Canada.
His reputation was impeccable. He was clean. He didn't have any, you could trust him. And look at, I did. Not just for reputation. I knew the guy, I thought.
When you say you could trust him, you mean you felt that you could trust him?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I add, I thought.
A 19-year-old Kyle Unger was arrested for the murder of a teenage girl in rural Manitoba. Again, George Dangerfield was the Crown attorney.
He was just a rough, shrewd prosecutor. And he was out for victory at any cost.
The Mr. Big stings have a 95% conviction rate of the cases that go to trial. In the hopes of extracting a confession, they convince desperate individuals to say anything just to get back to normal life. Beginning in the early 1990s, these large-scale undercover operations involve multiple undercover officers, cost tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and take months or even years to complete. The undercover officers create a fictitious crime organization and lure the target into the gang.
Well, you take a man who was down and out, destitute, homeless, jobless, and you offer him more money beyond his dreams, and you can make that man say anything you want him to say.
Unger's Mr. Big operation commenced on June 13, 1991. A primary undercover officer, Larry Tremblay, befriended the suspect and conveyed to him that there was an opportunity to become involved in a criminal organization. Corporal Larry Forbes was the Mr. Big of the operation, the fictitious head of the organization, and Unger was eager to make a good impression. After being reassured of the kind of person the boss was looking for, Unger hesitantly confessed to the murder of Bridget, later maintaining that he acted out the part in order to please his new boss. In future conversations with the undercover officers, Unger contradicted himself with respect to the details concerning the murder. He may have confessed after the immense pressure put on him through the Mr. Big sting, but his confession had all the wrong facts. February 28, 1992, Both Unger and Houlihan were convicted of first-degree murder, and both men appealed. Manitoba Court of Appeal upheld Unger's conviction, but allowed Houlihan's appeal. However, Houlihan committed suicide while awaiting to be retried.
The strength of the Canadian justice system is that it recognizes that it's made mistakes that have resulted in the conviction of innocent people. Its weakness is that it continues to make those mistakes.
The Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted was created in 1993, and it really has two purposes: to try and uncover wrongful convictions that have already occurred, to prevent them happening in the future as much as we can.
Unger maintained his innocence while completely shutting down his life in prison. Then, an important technology advanced that was extremely fundamental to his case: DNA analysis, proving that the strand of hair, the only forensic evidence linking him to the crime, did not belong to Unger. This left the Mr. Big confession as the only evidence against him. On October 23, 2009, Manitoba's Deputy Attorney General formally withdrew the charges against Unger and asked that he be acquitted. With no public inquiry into his wrongful conviction or any compensation, Unger's battle for justice was far from over. Through the media, the public became made even more aware of the case, and Unger was deemed an outsider, a loner, trouble, and extremely weird. The slang was considered to be one of Manitoba's most horrifying, and Unger was seen as a clever, brutal man who deserved a conviction. In custody, informers deemed an unreliable source of testimony. In more than 15% of wrongful conviction cases that are overturned through DNA testing, an informant testified against the defendant. Particularly, incentives were not disclosed to the jury. The theory that Unger was guilty of Bridget's murder, which the police sought to prove by any means necessary. Inducements offered in exchange for a confession to a crime by undercover officers posing as organized crime participants. In Unger's case, the seductive promise of money, power, and friendship was worth confessing to a crime which he had played no part in. Mr. Big operations used violence and fear to induce the target to confess. Judges and jury members have a hard time accepting that someone would confess to a crime that they did not commit. Hair microscopy, which was accepted as a science in courtrooms during Unger's case, is now seen as completely unreliable and not based on sound science. DNA analyzed the hair suspected to be Unger's and proved years later that it was not his. The bite marks found on the victim's body were also proven to be inconsistent with Unger's. Life after exoneration is a conviction in itself.
Event in a human life that is more stigmatizing and more stripping of one's sense of worth. These are years where they feel hopeless. There are not supports that will acknowledge their claims to innocence.
Although charges against Unger were withdrawn in 2009, his battle is not over. Unger lost 19 years of his life, 14 of those in jail for being falsely accused of a crime he did not commit. He launched a $14.5 million lawsuit but was denied compensation and was blamed because of his false confession. RCMP have refused to take any responsibility for Unger's wrongful conviction, maintaining that the damage he suffered was caused by his admission of having committed the offense.
Without the confession, he would not have been convicted. 12 men and women in a jury convicted him.
To this day, many people still believe of his guilt, labeling him a murderer and a monster.
As for Kyle Unger, he's at home in Merritt, British Columbia, doing what he did when he was imprisoned at 19, tinkering with old cars, trying not to think about the 14 years he lost.
I just want my life back, and I want to get on with it. And you can't do that by sitting around hating everybody and moping and feeling sorry for yourself.
Unger may have gained his freedom, but he will never truly be free in the court of public opinion.